The ocean is a place of wonder, but also a place of nightmares. One man, alone, stranded on the open sea, would come to learn this the hard way. His name was Michael Carter, and what was meant to be a peaceful solo journey became a desperate fight for survival. With no land in sight, no food, and no water, he faced the impossible. How long could he last? How far would he go to survive? This is his story. It started as a dream, a voyage across the open sea, just Michael and the waves. The morning sun shimmered over the endless blue, and the gentle breeze filled his sails. He had always felt at home on the water, the rhythmic rise and fall of the ocean a soothing escape from the noise of the world. Alone but not lonely, he let the vastness of the sea surround him, guiding his small sailboat toward adventure. But the ocean is unpredictable, and in an instant everything changed. The first sign was the wind. It shifted, growing colder, stronger. The sky, once clear, darkened as heavy clouds rolled in. The waves that had once rocked his boat gently now slammed against it with force. Michael's hands gripped the wheel as his heart pounded. He had checked the weather before setting sail. There was no storm in the forecast, but the sea follows no man's predictions. Within minutes, the storm was upon him. Rain lashed against his face, and the wind howled through the rigging. The boat pitched violently, each wave threatening to flip it. Water crashed over the sides, drenching him as he fought to maintain control. He reached for the radio, desperately calling for help, but the static answered back. Silence in the face of disaster. And then the worst happened. A monstrous wave, taller than any before, rose up in front of him, swallowing the sky. It crashed down with unrelenting force, and in an instant everything went black. Michael Carter awoke to silence. No roaring waves, no howling wind, just an eerie, endless quiet. His body ached, his clothes clung to him, drenched in seawater. His head throbbed, and when he reached up, his fingers brushed over a deep gash on his forehead. The last thing he remembered was the towering wave, the feeling of being swallowed whole by the ocean. Now he was here, but where was here? The sun blazed overhead, its unforgiving heat pressing down on him. He tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy, drained of all strength. The boat was gone. Everything was gone. He was floating alone on a small, battered life raft, rocking gently with the motion of the sea. Around him, the ocean stretched in every direction, an endless blue void. No land, no boats, no sign of rescue. He turned his head slowly, scanning his surroundings, hoping for something, anything that could lead him to safety. But there was nothing. Only the sun, the sea, and the slow, creeping horror of what had happened. He was adrift, lost in the vastness of the Pacific, with no way to call for help. A lump formed in his throat, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. Survival was all that mattered now. His first instinct was to check his supplies. His hands fumbled through the emergency kit attached to the raft. Inside, he found a small first aid pouch, a single sealed bottle of water, a fishing line with a hook, and 2 emergency flares. That was it. No food, no radio, no shelter from the relentless sun. He held up the water bottle, feeling the weight of it. Barely half a liter. If help didn't come soon, this wouldn't last him more than a day. Michael took a slow, careful sip, letting the water coat his dry throat before swallowing. He had to ration it. Every drop mattered. His stomach growled, a painful reminder of his hunger. But food would have to wait. Water was his greatest need. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Michael's hope wavered. He scanned the horizon again, praying to see a ship, a plane, anything. But the ocean remained empty. The realization settled in like a weight on his chest. No one knew where he was. If he was going to survive, he would have to do it alone. Then, just as the last light of day faded, movement caught his eye. A ripple in the water. A shadow gliding beneath the surface. Michael's breath caught in his throat. First he thought it was nothing. Just the waves playing tricks on his exhausted mind. But then, a fin sliced through the water, circling his raft. And that was when he knew. He was not alone. The first night was the hardest. The ocean, once so alive with waves and wind, had fallen eerily still. Michael lay curled in the cramped raft, his body trembling from cold and exhaustion. The realization had fully sunk in. He was stranded, alone, adrift in an endless void. As dawn broke on the second day, Michael's mind focused on one thing: survival. His body ached. His lips were already chapped from dehydration, and hunger gnawed at his stomach. The supplies he had were dangerously limited. He needed to stretch them as far as possible. Each sip of water was a decision. Drink now and ease the pain, or save it and suffer longer. He chose to suffer. Water was life. And without it, he wouldn't last a week. The days blurred together. The heat of the sun was relentless, burning his skin and draining his strength. With no shade, he used what little he had, a torn piece of his shirt to shield his face. At night, the cold set in, cutting through his already weakened body. Sleep became a cruel game. Short, restless moments stolen between nightmares of sinking into the abyss. By the fifth day, the hunger was unbearable. His stomach clenched in painful spasms, demanding food that wasn't there. He knew he had to act. The fishing line in his emergency kit was his only hope. With shaking hands, he tied the hook and lowered it into the water, praying for something, anything to bite. Hours passed. Nothing. The ocean mocked him with its vastness, refusing to offer even a scrap of salvation. Then, on the seventh day, his luck changed. A sudden tug on the line sent a jolt through his fingers. He pulled hard, his heart racing as the line tightened. After a desperate struggle, he hauled up a small fish, glistening under the merciless sun. There was no fire, no way to cook. He had no choice. With trembling hands, he brought the raw fish to his lips and bit down. The taste was unbearable. Salty, metallic, the texture slimy and unrecognizable. But this wasn't about taste. This was survival. Every bite was a battle, but he forced himself to swallow. He needed strength. He needed to live. By day 10, his body was failing. The sun had stripped him down to a shell of himself. His vision blurred, his muscles ached, and his mind drifted in and out of reality. Sometimes he swore he could hear voices, distant, familiar, calling his name. But every time he opened his eyes, there was nothing, just the endless blue. Then came day 12, and with it, a storm. The first raindrop hit his parched skin like a blessing. Then another, and another. Within moments, the sky opened, unleashing a downpour. Michael scrambled to cup his hands, collecting the precious water and drinking greedily. He used his torn shirt to soak up as much as he could, squeezing it into his mouth. It was the first relief he had felt in days. But relief quickly turned to terror. The storm wasn't just bringing water. It brought chaos. The winds howled, and waves swelled around the tiny raft, tossing it violently. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the horror of the moment. The ocean was angry, roaring with fury, ready to claim him. Michael clung to the sides of the raft as waves crashed over him, filling the small space with water. He bailed with his hands, desperately trying to keep from sinking. But the sea was relentless. And then, without warning, the raft flipped. The world turned upside down. Salt water filled his lungs as he was pulled beneath the surface. Panic surged through him as he thrashed, fighting against the powerful current. His hands clawed desperately, searching for anything to hold on to. His raft was drifting away. He was losing it. This was it. This was the end. And then, a miracle. His fingers brushed against something, one of the raft's ropes. He grabbed hold with every ounce of strength left in him, kicking furiously to pull himself up. The storm raged on, but he wouldn't let go. Not now. Not after all he had survived. With one final desperate pull, he hoisted himself back onto the overturned raft, gasping for air. The rain poured down, the waves continued their assault, but he was still alive. And that was all that mattered. 15 days. 15 days of pain, hunger, and fear. And now, as the storm finally passed, Michael lay there, broken, exhausted, but alive. But how much longer could he last? Morning came, but Michael barely noticed. His body was failing, his mind drifting in and out of consciousness. The salt had burned his skin raw, and the hunger was unbearable. His stomach had long stopped growling. Now there was only emptiness, a hollow ache that gnawed at his insides. The ocean had given him nothing but suffering, and yet he clung to life. But then, as the sun reached its peak, something broke the endless horizon. Shadow. Shape. A ship. At first, he thought it was another cruel hallucination. His mind had played tricks on him before. Visions of land, of people calling his name, of food that wasn't there. But this was real. A massive cargo ship, moving steadily across the waves. Hope surged through him like fire. With whatever strength he had left, Michael scrambled up onto his knees, his movements sluggish and weak. He reached for the emergency flares. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the cap, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. This was it, his one chance. If they didn't see him now, he might never get another opportunity. He yanked the flare's cord. A burst of red smoke erupted into the sky, a desperate beacon against the endless blue. He waved it frantically, his voice hoarse as he screamed, "Help! Over here!" The ship kept moving, steady, unchanging. His heart pounded as he grabbed the second flare, igniting it with shaking hands. Another burst of red, another scream for help. He waved, jumped, did everything he could to make himself seen. For a moment, the ship seemed to slow. His breath caught in his throat. Did they see him? Were they turning? But then, it became clear. The ship wasn't slowing for him. It was just adjusting course. A minor shift in direction. They weren't stopping. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His arms dropped to his sides, the last flare slipping from his grasp. He watched helplessly as the massive ship continued on, disappearing into the distance. Hope drained from him, leaving only emptiness. He wasn't even worth a second glance. A deep, guttural sob tore from his throat. He wasn't just lost. He was invisible. As the last of the red smoke faded into the sky, Michael collapsed onto the raft. The ocean rocked beneath him, indifferent to his suffering. He was alone. Again. Time had lost all meaning. Days and nights blurred together in an endless cycle of suffering. Michael's body was nothing but bones and burns. His skin cracked from the relentless sun. Hunger no longer gnawed at him. His body had given up on asking for food. The thirst, though, that was unbearable. The last drops of rainwater were gone. His lips were dry, his throat a desert. Every breath felt like swallowing fire. His mind drifted in and out of reality, the line between dreams and waking life fading. He saw things, his mother's face, his childhood home, a table filled with food. But when he reached out, there was nothing, just the vast, merciless sea. And then the ocean spoke. Not with words, but with temptation. The water beneath him, endless and deep, whispered promises of relief. Oh, refreshing. Just one sip. That's all it would take. He stared at the waves, mesmerized by their rhythm. The thirst was unbearable. It clawed at his throat, burned through his veins. Just one sip. Just one. His trembling hand dipped into the ocean. The salty water dripped from his fingertips, sparkling under the sun. He lifted his hand to his lips. No. A single sharp thought cut through the fog. Drinking seawater meant death. He knew that. But did it even matter anymore? He was dying anyway. What difference would it make? His vision blurred. The world swayed. The whispers grew louder. He could end it now. No more pain. No more thirst. Just slip beneath the waves. Let the ocean take him. It would be easy. Michael's body swayed forward, his weight shifting. The water welcomed him, ready to pull him under. But just as his fingers touched the surface, a splash, a ripple in the water, movement. His dazed eyes focused. Something was there. Fin. A shadow beneath the waves. Then another. And another. Sharks. A sudden jolt of adrenaline shot through him. They circled the raft, their sleek bodies gliding just beneath the surface. One of them bumped the raft, testing it. Testing him. They had been watching. Waiting. Michael's breath came in ragged gasps. The urge to give up was gone, replaced by pure survival instinct. If he slipped into the water now, it wouldn't be peaceful. It would be brutal. His trembling hands gripped the raft tighter. He wasn't ready to die. Not like this. The sharks circled for hours, their presence a cruel reminder. Life or death, the choice was his. And for the first time in days, Michael made a choice. He wanted to live. Michael had lost count of the days. Time no longer existed. Only survival. Only suffering. His body was shutting down. His mind slipping further into the void. The sun had become his enemy, beating down relentlessly, turning his skin into cracked leather. His lips were split, his throat a wasteland. Even the sharks had given up on him, vanishing into the deep. He was alone once more. But then a sound, faint, distant, a low hum, a vibration in the air, different from the silence that had surrounded him for so long. His heavy eyelids fluttered open, his blurry vision scanning the horizon. And then he saw it. A helicopter. At first, he didn't believe it. His mind had tricked him before. Was this just another cruel hallucination? A mirage in the sky? But no, this was real. The rhythmic thump of the rotors cut through the wind, growing louder, closer. His body refused to move. He wanted to scream, to wave his arms, but all he could do was stare. His strength was gone. The helicopter hovered above the water, its spotlight sweeping across the ocean. They were searching, but they hadn't seen him yet. Desperation surged through him. He had to do something. Anything. With the last flicker of energy in his broken body, Michael reached for the emergency whistle hanging from his life vest. His fingers, weak and shaking, barely managed to close around it. He brought it to his lips and blew. A thin, weak sound escaped. Not enough. Again. He blew harder. And again. His vision darkened at the edges, his body on the verge of collapse. Then movement. The helicopter turned. The spotlight shifted. A beam of white light cut through the darkness, landing directly on him. A burst of static crackled through the radio. "We've got him. Survivor spotted." Tears welled in his eyes. He wasn't sure if he was crying from relief, exhaustion, or pure disbelief. He was found. He was going home. A rescuer in a bright orange suit descended from the helicopter, the harness lowering him to the raft. Michael couldn't hear what he was saying. His world had turned to white noise. Strong hands grabbed him, securing him in the harness. The last thing he saw as he was lifted into the air was the endless ocean beneath him, the grave that had almost claimed him. As the helicopter pulled away, carrying him towards safety, the first drops of rain began to fall. The ocean, which had nearly killed him, now offered him a final gift: water. Michael closed his eyes. He had survived.